Hey guys, so I want to come on here and talk about this article that was sent to me by a subscriber. And the interesting thing of it is I was already going to get on here and talk about another article that came out talking about MLK's secret white girlfriend. So I decided to just combine those two things together and put it in this one video. And so shout out to the person who sent me this article, and shout out to all people who send me articles. Now, on the 4th of this month, it was the anniversary of the day that, with the help of a black coon, MLK was assassinated. Now, I want to pause right here and say something really quickly. I still have black people sitting here trying to convince me that somehow, because Stephon Clark was black, that we should support him regardless to his anti-black white supremacist ideology. MLK's assassination, Malcolm X's assassination, Huey P. Newton's situation, Marcus Garvey's situation, are all examples of the mistake that black people have been making by allowing people into their circle based solely on their skin color, okay? This is very dangerous to do. So when you sit here and say that people should somehow support Stephon Clark, despite the fact that he was a raging coon and hated black people, that all that does is show society that you are still too stupid to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors. Okay, supporting someone on the simply on the merit of their blackness is the most lunatic thing that anybody could ever say. And I'm not going to stay on this topic too much, but I think that it says something when you have a group of people that simply cannot learn from history, because nobody should be suggesting that you support a person who clearly hated you just based on them being black. So then that means you should also celebrate the coons who set up MLK, Malcolm X, Huey P. Newton, Marcus Garvey, Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, and all other people black coons who are known for sabotaging the revolutions. That's just the reality of what it is. Now, if we go back to this thing, everybody knows, and everybody who follow me should know, that I've never been a proponent of MLK. I think that integration was very damaging to the black community. And I think that the civil rights movement that was simply about sexual access to whites was the biggest issue, one of the biggest downfalls that we've had, okay? Because integration was only beneficial to white people. And due to the fact that MLK was having a sexual relationship with a white woman, that right there should tell you what his motives were for integration. Because he was having a sexual affair with a white woman during Jim Crow South. And anybody who thinks that wouldn't drive his desire to bridge that gap and get rid of anti-miscegenation and segregation laws so that he would be able to openly have a relationship with a white woman is an idiot. This is why I say today that swirlers are compromised, because you can't straddle that fence between fighting white supremacy and loving it too. It's a big contradiction. And the thing of it is people don't see how much of a contradiction that is, although they're complaining about the consequences of integration that was fought for by a man that was having a sexual relationship with a white woman. Now, what I also don't understand is how he was able to separate that white woman from the white supremacists that he was supposedly fighting against. This is a problem. And a lot of people will sit here and bring up the people like the MLKs or whatever, and they'll say, oh, well, they were with white women, but they still fought for the cause. And look at where we're at now. So yes, they were white people with white people, and you don't know where we would be had they not been compromised and had they not been straddling that fence and having relationships with white people while somehow claiming to be against white supremacy. You're not against white supremacy if you're engaging in an intimate sexual relationship with the mothers and daughters and nurturer of white supremacy. You just aren't. And so even before I knew that MLK had a white woman that he was cheating on his black wife with, just by virtue of going through a process, a civil rights movement where they're kicking you, beating you, sicking dogs on you, putting water hoses on you, having to have the military escort you into the schools of the very people that you were integrating with, that right there was problematic to me, because it showed that the civil rights movement was an emotionally driven behavior rather than a calculated, strategic, sit out and plan and think about hundreds of years or 50 years into the future, what impact this might have on your descendants. Black people don't do that. White people do. That is why white people are still dominating black people, because they think into the future, and they're not going to let any type of sex or any type of interpersonal relationship with a black person deter them from their goal. That means they don't care anything about you. They will lay down with you and have sex with you and still get out the bed and perpetuate white supremacy. Black people, obviously, as evidenced by reality, are incapable of doing that. Black people have been subjugated by white people for a consistently long period of time, in which they didn't receive any psychological treatment for that. There has never been a break in between white people disenfranchising and subjugating black people. So I don't understand where people would think that black people have the mental and cognitive wherewithal necessary to somehow not be emotionally attached to the white people that they lay up with, and to not be compromised by their relationship with that white person. It doesn't make any sense why black people would think that. But then again, you can look at the condition of black people and see that our thought process and our actions have to be inconsistent with what we really want, or else we will be getting what we want. That's just a reality, because again, we are the only group of people who are going through what we're going through, and you'll still have black people who will sit there and fight for interracial dating as if it's somehow doing something other than giving them the illusion of false approval by these cavelings that they shouldn't even want to be around. So I've never been really for MLK. Of course, he was a black man who you can just say, okay, whatever, he had good intentions for the black community. But you really don't know that. He could have been moving simply for his own self-serving benefit of wanting to openly lay up with the white woman that he was doing behind his wife's back. Now, this says, Dr. King says segregation harms us all. Environmental research shows he was right, which actually environmental research doesn't. But they will be putting this out there because when black people were segregated, they had more success than these cavelings did. So the system of white supremacy cannot be maintained by black people separating and owning all of their talent and money. It doesn't work that way, because the reality of it is through that segregation during that time, white people saw exactly what capability black people have. Now, black people don't understand their own capability, so they go out here and they continuously fight and die and get brutalized and harmed and subjugated and disrespected and demeaned in their quest of somehow aligning themselves with these cavelings. But the reality of it is what black people are trying to obtain is not obtainable. Because if you think that you're going to have some utopia where somehow white people are loving you and not threatened or caring about your blackness, you're sadly mistaken. Again, you can look at the black community and see that black people's mentality is clearly not conducive to liberation or progression, because we have not had liberation or progression. And the reason why is because that's not what black people want, okay? Now, they're trying to say that integrating people somehow benefits black people, and it doesn't. It says, Dr. King preaches that segregation was harmful not only to black Americans, but also to the nation as a whole. He didn't die, he was killed before the modern environmental movement, but a growing body of research around pollution and health shows his belief about segregation hurting everyone extends to the environment as well. No, it doesn't. Many American cities that are more racially divided have higher levels of pollution than less segregated cities. Now, what I will say is that in terms of, now I'm not sure about in terms of pollution, okay? But again, if you look at pollution as chemtrails, you can surmise that the chemtrails that they spray in highly black areas are a little bit different than those in white areas. You know, you could go to that one and be like, okay, well, whatever, because they are known to taking contaminated vaccines and GMO foods, and they put them in what you would call black areas, okay? And they don't do the same in white areas. So on that level, then I could say there's some truth to that. But the reality of it is pollutants don't just restrict themselves to one area, especially not pollutants that are in the air, that are airborne pollutants. They do not restrict themselves to certain areas. They travel. This is the same concept of saying that a smoker's secondhand smoke is just going to stay within the area, a certain confined area, and it's not. It's going to travel. So it doesn't matter where they put the pollutants are going to be pollutants, and they're going to travel. And if they are in the air, they're going to distribute themselves wherever, okay? It says many American cities that are racially divided have higher levels of pollution than less segregated cities. As a result, both whites and minorities who live in less integrated communities are exposed to higher levels of pollution than those who live in more integrated areas. Now, I want you guys to note that they're not providing you any evidence of what they're saying. The price that America must pay for the continued oppression of the Negro is the price of his own destruction, Dr. King wrote in a 1962 address, an analysis of the ethical demands of integration. In it, he set out the political, ethical, and spiritual reasons he believed that segregation was harmful for all. Now, understand that they will put these out, but they won't quote to you that MLK, before he died, said that he was integrating his people into a burning building, and he realized that he made a mistake. That is the one thing you will never see any of these white people mentioning, because they stick to whatever they feel like benefits their narrative. And unfortunately, black people will sit here and use all of this in favor of the very white people who hate them and advocate for their death. Now, I want to move to the next article because, again, they're not proving anything. And if people want to, if you guys want that article, then I'll put it in there and you guys can read it. I'll leave it in there. But anyway, this is what Politico put out, and they put this out. About we were madly in love, the untold story of MLK's white girlfriend. Now, understand that MLK is dead, so he can't speak on behalf of himself, but it has been long said that MLK was cheating on his wife with many people, white women being one of them. And I don't think that you can trust the intentions of a civil rights activist who is cheating on his wife with a white woman who is in the group, the very group that he's complaining about. Because you cannot say that you don't like white male, white supremacy, but you lay up with the women who instill hatred in the minds of those white men when they are sons. This says, it took me a long time to find Betty Moitz. I had first learned her full name while reading Bearing the Cross, the 1986 biography about Martin Luther King Jr., written by David Garrow. In the book, Garrow briefly described a serious relationship between King and a young white woman around the same age named Betty. They had met at Crowther Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, at the time where King was a divinity student from the age of 19 to 22 when he graduated in May 1951. In Bearing the Cross, Garrow quoted a close friend and mentor of King at the time, Reverend P.S. J. Barber, who said the relationship had left King as a man with a broken heart. He never recovered, okay? Now, so this looks like the time that he was in that school may have predated his time as a civil rights activist, but the reality of it is there have been reports that said during that civil rights activism, he was cheating on his wife with white women. So this Betty Moitz is probably not the first white woman that he was with. And the thing of it is people need to understand the flawed mentality of a black man who during the Jim Crow South would even have a desire in a white woman. There is something deeply wrong with you, because understand what sparked the civil rights movement was the fact that a black boy was beaten beyond recognition by white men for being lied on and saying that he winked at or looked at or was somewhere near a white woman. That boy's name was Emmett Till. So the fact that MLK could have knowledge of that, and many black men had knowledge of that, and still went out and dated white women during that exact same time, that tells you that their obsession with this white woman is greater than their desire to live. And I simply don't trust any black men who would try to rationalize dating the mothers and daughters and nurturers of the white supremacist male that they complain about. That's just the reality. If people don't see that that's a contradiction, I don't know what to tell you. In a way, I never recovered from that quote. As I wrote my own book about King, I wasn't satisfied with such a short description of such an apparently devastating relationship. Guerra was the first biographer to discover Betty's last name, and fortunately for me, buried it in a heavyweight endnote at the back of the book. That endnote took me on 2 cross-country flights, spurred dozens of calls to wrong numbers, and knocked on countless doors of people I thought might have been Betty. Might have known Betty. They didn't, but I left my business card anyway, and eventually one of those people found someone who might know Betty, and that person sent me an address to which I sent a letter. It worked. From the start, Moise and King's relationship was anything but carefree. Almost all of King's friends, including Barbara, tried to discourage him from staying with Betty, knowing what an interracial relationship would mean for his future. Again, like I said, with any black man or a black woman who defends being in a system of white supremacy and dating the participants of white supremacy is mentally ill, including MLK. And the reality of it is everyone should question his motives, knowing that he was with a white woman, because he was probably fighting for his right to lay up with a white woman, simply getting other black people to join him in it. Because again, towards the end, he realized that was a mistake, but he should have known it was a mistake before he even pursued it. Okay? I thought it was a dangerous situation that could get out of hand, and if it did get out of hand, it would smear King. His Crozer classmate, Cyril Pyle, recalled in a 1986 interview it would make his future hard for him. No, they basically understood the contradiction, and they knew that during that time, people wouldn't have followed MLK if they knew that he was sitting there talking about white supremacy while having sex with a white woman. He wouldn't have been able to use that influence of black women while he was laying up, cheating on a black woman with a white woman. That's why they didn't put it out there, because he already knew it was a contradiction and he would lose the support of people, of the ones that mattered the most. But Betty recalls that time and the young King with fondness anyway. In our year-long correspondence and one long meeting in January 2016, Betty, who recently passed away at the age of 89, told me the story of their relationship and just how close King came to walking away from his future plans for her. We were madly in love, the way young people can fall in love, she told me during our conversation at home. Again, you can't trust the words of anything Caveling say. They have some delusional fantasy that all black people love them dearly. So based on the account that this woman is no longer around and MLK is no longer around, I don't know how much merit I would give to her actual account of the story. But regardless of whether he was in love with her or not, there has been reports, multiple, of MLK cheating on his wife with white women. From a young age, Betty Moise had a family. I don't need to know her life story, so I really don't. I don't need to know her life story. I want to know what she's saying about this situation. At first, she and ML were making small talk in Miss Hannah's kitchen, nothing that would cause nearby students to turn their heads, but it continued after they spoke on and off for the next few months. Betty learned about ML's background and his tremendous hope for the future. Crozer was known as a very radical religious institution. I was surprised to hear from ML himself that he had more conservative beliefs. ML's own feelings for Betty were something he tried to keep secret. Though he had even written to his mother about his other recent dating prospects, he would not have been all that eager to inform her that he was interested in a young white woman. The thing of it is this also presents the idea that no matter how much a black man say that he is into the black community, he is more into his obsession and addiction to white women, because he would compromise all of it for a white woman. And that's something that black men continue to show on a daily basis. Again, not all of them, but the ones who date white women. Walter McCall, ML's best friend and hallmate, who went by Mac, knew, of course, but he saw no harm in helping his best friend separate himself even further from racial norms they believed were outdated. And though a few other students took note of ML and Betty Friend's dialogue, it was, after all, a small world inside Old Main. No one seemed too bothered. Again, this is from the perspective of cabling. So with the details, you can choose to discard what doesn't make sense or what seems ridiculous versus those that don't. Fellow Crowther seminarian and King friend Marcus Wood, in particular, understood some of what spurred ML's attraction. I suppose he thought that here I am out of the South now and not back home, Wood said in a 1986 interview. Out in the open, nothing illegal or free place. Sure, I can go over and talk to this white girl. Again, this is a pathology that Black men still have today, and that seem to have started not with the Moors, but with the African men who were arranging marriages and helping to whitewash Egypt. This is something that Black men continue to ignore, although they claim that they want to help eradicate the system of white supremacy and replace it with the system of justice. In order to do that, then you have to go back to the beginning and find out how and why and what contributed to the implementation of the system of white supremacy to begin with. But no Black man is willing to do that because they care more about their egos than the condition of their community, which to me makes them no better than the white supremacists who care more about preserving white supremacy than the lives of their own people, which is why they won't address this situation of mass shooters. Okay? Now, the thing of it is that throughout the course of ML's first year at Crowther, his relationship with Betty continued to develop after their chats moved out of Miss Hannah's basement kitchen. Soon, ML was also making the straight 5-minute walk from Old Main to visit her at the Moyts home. He used to go over their house quite often to see her, Wood wrote in his 1998 memoir. ML felt at ease with Betty. It was the enthusiasm with which he spoke on a wide range of topics that first attracted her. He would talk and talk and talk, Betty says. Look, I don't believe this because there is nothing that a white woman and a Black man would have in common to talk about. And they still don't. And that's why whenever you still see these relationships, they are very superficial. They're not about love and they don't work out because a Black man and a white woman, again, have nothing in common. Usually the only thing they're doing is engaging in sexual degeneracy. That's all that there is. But again, white women are known for having sex with lions and tigers and bears. So having sex with a Black man, if they equate them to be an animal, will be nothing to her. And yet Black men run around feeling special because a woman that will have sex with a dog will also have sex with him. Betty says that first they discussed his time in the South and how different it was from the idealized culture within the seminary. They're trying to get you to believe that MLK had a discussion about white supremacy, Jim Crow South, with this white woman, and they were able to connect on that. He didn't yet know how, but according to Betty, one thing ML knew at age 19 was that he could change the world. When ML returned to school the following fall of 1949, his and Betty's relationship continued to blossom, but this was also when the difficulties began for the young couple. By this point, they had become more comfortable on campus, sitting on benches and talking about their plans and goals for the future in full view of ML's classmates and teachers. When asked if she had concern about how they might be seen, Betty shrugged. I never noticed. I always had a tan and dark brown hair, but the 20-year-old ML was more aware of the potential social fallout. So she's trying to say people saw her as non-white. So she's trying to give the impression that she somehow experienced the same. Again, this is most of this is lies, obviously. It's important to note that in 1949, interracial relationships were still very much taboo. No, they were illegal in the United States. fewer than 40 miles from Crozer was the state of Maryland, where the first law against interracial marriage was enacted in 1664. Then that doesn't mean they were taboo. That means they were unlawful. The state would keep similar laws on its book for more than 300 years. Even in 1958, a Gallup poll would report that an astounding 94% of white Americans disapproved of interracial marriage. Now, I'm going to stop here because you guys can read this whole thing if you want to, because I'm not going to go into the history of that. But the bottom line is a Gallup poll still shows that white Americans disapprove of interracial relationships, while black people sit up here and promote it, lust after it, and act like it's the best thing since sliced bread, although they don't benefit from it. Now, the reason why I'm not going to continue with this letter is because I don't really need to know the intricacies of whatever this relationship was from the perspective of a white woman. I don't need to know that, especially a white woman who's going to try to, from this interviewer's perception, insist that somehow she was seen as an ethnic non-white, and so therefore she had some kind of shared experience with them. I'm not going to sit there and deal with that. But the reality of it is, bottom line is, throughout the history, in terms of the struggle for black people, you have always had black people who were compromised, straddling the fence between loving white supremacist females and complaining about white supremacy by way of white males. That is a contradiction, and that's why we haven't gotten anywhere. So I don't care about people sitting here saying, oh, well, some of our civil rights leaders were white women. Okay, and we're still dealing with white supremacy. They're still engaging in contradictory behaviors, and we're in a worse position than we've ever been in this country, okay? Black people post-slavery did better economically than they're doing right now. Black people have no economy, they have no unity, they have no schools, they have no hospitals, they have no banks. You only have spending power, but in terms of the wealth of your community, it's negative. And black people will sit here and tell you that your civil rights leader were laid up with white people, and so therefore they somehow accomplished something. No, it is their love of all things white that is presenting progression, because again, you cannot love white supremacy and fight against it at the same time. It doesn't work like that. So until this contradiction is gone, you can only see the same thing happening, and black people's mental illness and lunacy and insanity will convince them that somehow things will change. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you for your support. I'll see you in the next video.